all the A-roll from this video is from the Logitech Brio. This review of the Logitech Brio is going to be very different than others. I'll go over its basic attributes, but I'll also cover some of the advanced software aspects of the device. In addition, I'll be going over how to maximize the image quality of the Brio using lighting and advanced settings. I'll talk about how it interacts with other various software, including Zoom, Logitech's own software, Logitech Capture and G-Hub, and OBS. And finally, I'll talk about a few of the problems that I've had with this device and how I've dealt with some of them. Specifications. The Logitech Brio records in up to 1080p 60 frames per second or 4K 30 frames per second. These resolutions both require a USB 3.0 or higher connection. To do this, the Brio comes with a USB 3.0 cable. One end is Type C and the other is Type A. Without a USB 3.0 port, you'll be stuck at a max resolution of 1080 30 frames per second. The Brio has a 90-degree field of view measured diagonally, which makes it one of the widest field of view webcams on the market. The field of view can also be adjusted from 90 degrees to 78 degrees or 65 degrees. It has a detachable monitor clip on the bottom that reveals a standard 1/4 inch tripod thread, and it has two microphones that are omnidirectional. That's all the basic specs. Now, let's get into the price. I bought my Logitech Brio for $150, but this was before the pandemic. I've seen this hovering from around $160 to $200 lately, and when the webcam shortage was at its peak, I saw people buying this for up to $400 US. I think the MSRP on launch for this was $200. I personally wouldn't spend more than $200 on this, but if you want a link to the current prices, I have linked to Amazon in the description below. Build quality. The body of the Brio is incredibly small, so considering how small the sensor and lens is, it's amazing what kind of image it produces.
The wire has a length of 80 inches. I wish it was a little bit longer, but it's way longer than the Stream Cam, which is only 60 inches.
I don't like how you have to kind of force and pull the monitor clip off. It doesn't like unscrew or unclip. And the tripod thread does make a bit of a creaky sound. The webcam can't be tilted up or down or left or right. It's just kind of like stuck in one position. The device does get very hot after prolonged use. Overall, the build quality is just okay, but for a device that's this small with the specs that are this good, I think it's really good overall. It's very compact. Image quality. In this section, first, I'm going to very briefly show what this device looks like out the box. Then I'll demonstrate how to use proper lighting and how to manually adjust the settings to improve the image quality. With optimized lighting and settings, I'll go over sharpness, color accuracy, depth of field, and autofocus. Image quality out the box. This is the Logitech Brio at fully automatic settings with minimal lighting. In the daytime, it's just going to be daylight itself, and at nighttime, there is an overhead light on, which is not very bright. This is daytime, 1080p, 60 frames per second. This is daytime, 4K, 30 frames per second. Nighttime, 1080p, 60 frames per second. Nighttime, 4K, 30 frames per second. In the daytime, the image is passable, but a lot of the detail is lost, and the uneven shadows make for a very unflattering image. At night, there's just not a lot of hope, as the image is grainy and the color reproduction is pretty much impossible. Now I'm going to add in my studio lights and use manual settings. The Logitech Brio is at its full potential with a lot of light. How much light? As much as you can give it. In the daytime, I'll be using the Elgato ring light and the Limo Studio LMS 103 lighting kit. At night, I'll be using the Elgato ring light, Limo Studio LMS 103, and two Elgato Key Light Airs as backlights. As for settings, I changed them using OBS. OBS and XSplit give way better control over settings than other software, but I'll get to that in a later section. The exposure is generally best at about -5 or -6. -5 is brighter, but -6 has less motion blur. At -4, the shutter speed is just way too slow to get a usable image, as it effectively drops the frame rate. The gain I have set at 0 if at all possible to keep the graininess of the image to a minimum, but in some cases I'll raise it up slightly, maybe to 20 or so.
Your white balance is really just going to depend on the color temperature of your lights. For my A-roll, I had the light set to about 5150 Kelvin, and I had the white balance at about 4120.
Anyway, let's break down the performance with these optimizations. Sharpness. At 1080p, 30 or 60 frames per second, the Logitech Brio has above average sharpness for a webcam. You can still see text from far away, but there's definitely a lot of detail lost compared to if you were actually looking at the scene yourself. The edges of objects are a bit soft and pixelated, and textures look airbrushed. The less light you have, the less detail there is. So if you're recording at night, you kind of need to flood this thing with light to get the most out of it. Compared to the Logitech Stream Cam, the Stream Cam might be slightly sharper, but not by a lot. One advantage the StreamCam has is at the maximum exposure value before the frame rate starts to suffer, the StreamCam has less motion blur, so movement looks more natural. But the trade-off is the Brio can give you a brighter usable shot without increasing the gain than the StreamCam is able to in any given lighting scenario. This is why people complain about the StreamCam being really grainy. Even though they say it's a 2.0 aperture lens, the image is pretty dark unless you increase the gain, which adds graininess. Now this was all at 1080p, and I'll admit, when I first reviewed the Brio and compared it to the Logitech StreamCam, I only had a 1080p monitor. At 4K, the Brio sharpness is really good. None of Logitech's other webcams come close, which makes sense because they don't have any other 4K webcams as of this recording. The edges on objects are clean. This is really important for green screen use, as in 1080p my green screen was pretty good, but sometimes I'd blend into the background due to the soft edges. Using a green screen at 4K, really good. The airbrush effect is gone. It actually gets a bit too much detail on my face at times, and that's a great problem to have. Next, let's get into color accuracy. This isn't actually a scientific method of me determining color accuracy, just me comparing what the image looks like to what I see in real life. On automatic settings, your colors are going to be all over the place. Sometimes things are too blue, but usually they're too red. I prefer to manually adjust the white balance to get things in the middle, but even when doing this, the colors are still not as close to reality as the StreamCam, but you can improve them a bit more by changing the video format. Now, one thing that I don't like about Logitech webcams is the way that they handle white balance. So if you'll notice, when I go to automatic white balance, it gives you a type of yellow that you just don't really have access to. You can't replicate that yellow. Yeah, it looks too yellow. The room doesn't quite look like that. But when it's daytime, it actually does help out a little bit. But you can't change that at all. So let me show you real quick. I'm going to take auto off, and it puts it at some random value. I don't know where it is. But here it is now. And whether I move it to the right or the left, I can't actually get that same yellow that they had. They just have access to other colors that in automatic white balance that you just can't actually match up. All right, so the StreamCam has this issue too, but the StreamCam just in general, first of all, just has better colors. Like, I'm just be real, it just has better colors than the Brio. But if you move this around, you can get closer to that yellow than you can get on the Brio. Now, yeah, it doesn't look the same, and this is more blue for sure, but you can get closer on the StreamCam than you can get on the Brio. The Logitech Brio can record in 3 different video compression formats: MJPEG, NV12, and YUY2. However, it can only record 1080p 60 frames per second, 1440p 30 frames per second, and 4K 30 frames per second at MJPEG. 1080 30 is the max you're going to get with NV12 or YUY2. The footage recorded with MJPEG appears the most compressed, and some of the subtleties of brown and orange are lost compared with NV12 and YUY2. This is one of the reasons the Brio is notorious for having oversaturated colors. It approximates a lot of the red and pink in skin tones, and it just can't get the brown of my skin quite right. NV12 and YUY2 both replicate color better, with YUY2 appearing the most realistic. Unfortunately, since both of these formats are capped at 1080p 30 frames per second, there isn't as much opportunity to use either of these. For me, at least. If you like 1080 30, this is a great option, but for me, if I'm going to be recording at 1080p, I'm going to have that at 60 frames per second if I can. And if you're going to give me the option to do 4K, I'm going to do 4K. Now, you can also change the color range to match up with the video format. In my experience, MJPEG looks best at full, NV12 looks best at full, and YUY2 looks best at partial. Even though YUY2 appears to show a greater difference between similar colors in partial, it does not show as much nuance with very bright and very dark colors. So anything kind of dark looks more black, and anything bright seems more white. I still think YUY2 partial is better than YUY2 full, because on full it causes this washed out haze, which I'm definitely not a fan of. So if you're looking to improve your colors, then YUY2 and NV12 are great options to try, but if you just want the highest frame rate resolution as possible, then you're going to be stuck with MJPEG anyway. And the colors there are decent, but they're definitely not the best. Depth of field. The Logitech Brio has a deep depth of field. That means no blurry background, no bokeh. But like I said, the 4K on the Brio is still pretty sharp, so there are a few ways to fake a blurry background. The method I use is using a green screen and pasting a blurred picture of my background to the layer underneath the webcam in OBS. There are less effective software-only methods like XSplit VCam and Chroma Cam, but you have to pay for those, so if you're going to spend money, you might as well just buy a green screen, in my opinion. If you want real depth of field, then you're going to need to get a DSLR with a wide aperture lens. Autofocus. When I first got the Brio, the autofocus was pretty good, pretty fast. It's still good, but it's mostly calibrated for faces, and it will try to avoid focusing on other things if a face is in frame at the same time as another object. So unless you intend on putting things right next to the webcam, I just turn autofocus off so you never go out of focus. Alright, that was a deep dive into the image quality of the Logitech Brio. I really like it a lot, and it's been my main camera ever since I bought it for YouTube and Twitch. Of course, a link to the webcam is in the description if you want to check it out, but let's move on to software. The Logitech Brio is plug and play, meaning once you plug it in, it automatically installs necessary drivers in a few seconds and can be used in any program that accepts webcams, so you can immediately start using it in Zoom or OBS. Logitech also has two applications on their website for this device, Logitech Capture and Logitech G Hub. To get the best possible image quality, I highly suggest using OBS to tweak your settings and recording or streaming straight in that. And if you're video conferencing, send your OBS footage to Zoom with OBS Virtual Camera. So you should just do that and skip this whole section. But just to be thorough, let me demonstrate what happens if you use this webcam in Logitech Capture, Logitech G Hub, or directly with a video conferencing software like Zoom. Logitech Capture, also known as Logic Capture, can be downloaded separately from Logitech's website, and it allows for some basic adjustments like resolution and frame rate. You can even add in a second scene like window capture, and you can change your audio source. Overall, it still lacks the granular webcam control compared to OBS. You cannot adjust the gain, and even though you can set priority to frame rate or exposure, you can't change the exposure manually either. Also, for some reason, Logic Capture is maxed out at 1080p 60 frames per second. That means there's no 4K functionality in the native Logitech app for a webcam that's marketed for its 4K. Logitech, please. Logitech G Hub serves a different purpose. It can't actually record anything itself, but it functions as a settings preset program. It works with Logitech's webcams like the Brio, but many of their other peripherals like keyboards. One of the biggest weaknesses with Logitech webcams and most webcams on the market is most or all of your settings get erased and set to default when you unplug the device or when your system is restarted. One of the few exceptions to this is the field of view, which for some reason persists indefinitely until you change it back in Logitech software. Logitech G Hub combats this by adding a settings preset to your webcam whenever it's open. G Hub doesn't set the resolution and frame rate of your webcam, but it does let you change priority to either exposure or frame rate, just like Logic Capture. It allows for the same settings adjustment as Logic Capture with the ability to manually change the exposure, which is great. Unfortunately, there is still no gain adjustment setting here, making this software kind of useless for maximizing your webcam's quality. The gain seems to consistently revert to its middle value, 128, if you verify it in OBS. This causes the webcam image to be way too noisy. The ideal value is as low as possible, 0, but you can't adjust that in Logitech G Hub. So close, but so far. The only reason I would use either of these software is to change the field of view. Even though you can zoom up to 5 times in any software that lets you access the driver settings, the field of view change is a little bit different. This change is semi-permanent and can only be changed back in Logitech software. And also you can zoom up to 5 times in any of the field of views. The Brio can be used directly in video conferencing software like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or Skype. But the downside to this is in these programs, you get basically no control over your webcam at all. So your image pretty much looks trash. You also can't zoom in or change your field of view if you don't want so much of your background showing. I would avoid using my webcam directly in video conferencing software if possible and send it through OBS first. The last thing I want to talk about in regards to software is HDR or high dynamic range. This webcam is marketed as having HDR. I never talked about it in any of my other videos, but now that I have a 4K HDR monitor, I can finally say that the HDR setting in Logitech Capture and Logitech G Hub doesn't seem to make any difference at all. I think those are the only two places where you get an option to even enable the HDR. The footage recorded with the HDR on while using Logic Capture is definitely not an HDR file. I checked this with media info and I also uploaded a video straight to YouTube and it didn't show up as an HDR file. In my experience, the HDR on this webcam is pure marketing. I've seen a lot of written reviews mention the HDR, but I've never seen anybody demonstrate the HDR. Now let's get into audio quality, and just a warning, the audio is going to get a lot worse because I'm going to switch to the Brio's built-in microphone right now. The Logitech Brio has two omnidirectional microphones that are supposed to have noise canceling technology. The only sound here is just the fan from my computer, so we'll see if you can hear that. As you can hear, the sound is quite a bit muddy and muffled. This is just over arm's length away. I've reviewed a few inexpensive but good quality popular microphones on this channel, like the Fifine K669B, this Razer Siren Mini. But if you're really interested in background noise cancellation, then I'll be reviewing some dynamic microphones in the near future. Now, as much as I like the Logitech Brio, I like to be very transparent in my reviews. So I'm going to go over the 3 biggest problems that I've had with this device since I bought it. The 3 main problems I've had are persistent settings, input delay, and flickering. The first problem I've already mentioned, which is there's no real ability to have your settings persist after unplugging the webcam or rebooting your system. This is really annoying, and there's not actually a viable workaround because, like I said, G-Hub won't let you change the gain settings. The only webcam that I've used that actually eliminates this problem altogether is the AverMedia PW513, because the cam engine software after the update is actually pretty good. I think the Logitech Brio looks way better than the AverMedia PW513. I've compared them a few times, but that is one thing that webcam does better than this one. The second problem I've been having is the input delay. Now, this isn't actually a Brio specific problem. This happens with pretty much any webcam that you use. It takes longer to process the video feed coming from a webcam than it does to process the audio coming from an external microphone. This makes it so that your audio is a little bit desynced from your video, especially when you're looking at like lip syncing. I'm going to teach you how to maximize your webcam's quality for free in OBS. It's not by a lot. In my case, it's about 100 to 150 milliseconds of delay. There are a few ways that you can deal with this. You can go in OBS and offset your microphone by putting a delay of 100 to 150 milliseconds or however much your delay is. What I end up having to do is edit it in post in the video editing software Vegas Pro, because since I review a bunch of different webcams, so if I just set it for one, then all the rest of them are going to be off anyway. If you're using this in video conferencing software, I don't think it's that serious, and this is just something to be aware of. The last problem I've had with the Brio that I'm going to mention is flickering. This is when the screen kind of like glitches out and spazzes. Here's the thing, I don't know exactly what causes this. I don't know how to replicate it, and usually it happens like once, and then I'll try to record it, and once I start recording, it goes away and it won't show up for like 2 more months. This leads me to believe that it has something to do with the USB providing power to the device. I'm only speculating that maybe the USB thinks that this device shouldn't be getting as much power as it is, and then it kind of starts shorting, which is causing that glitching. But then once you press record in OBS or like some sort of like software that's actually actively using it, then the flickering goes away because it starts giving it more power. I really have no idea. I have not found an actual solution to this that makes it never happen ever, and I haven't been able to replicate this enough times to actually like pin it down. So I don't have a definitive solution for this, but I did want to bring it up just in case it does happen, so that you know that this is like a possibility. And I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal. I don't think it's going to keep recurring. And once I do start recording in OBS, it goes away every time. And now for my verdict, I highly recommend the Logitech Brio. I've been using it as my main camera since I got it, and I've reviewed a bunch of webcams. I plan on reviewing even more, but this one so far, it's the best. I'm still interested in testing the Autocam HD 4K webcam, but that device isn't actually a consumer webcam because you can't really buy it in most. I don't think you can buy it in stores at all. You can't buy it on Amazon. You can't even really buy it on their website. So like, I have an Amazon link to the Logitech Brio in the description. This has been Bad Intent from StreamTechReviews.com, and I'll see you in the next review.